first, me being Fabrice Nordmann I live in France and Belgium, in both countries, and I run a company named One More Thing. And you often know it more under its other name, fmcloud.fm, which provides hosting services. It's more popular on on the international scale. Just little bit more about myself. So this is not my son. This is a picture of me the very year I started using FileMaker, right? So there's been some time. And now I'm going to try to do something very unusual. I'm very used to presenting techniques or recipes or whatever. Now I've been trying for a couple of months, years to start transmitting experience, right? I believe that we are a species that has invented speech and writing, and it gives us such an advantage and power to transmit knowledge to the next generation. It's how we sent people to the moon, and with basically exactly the same biological brains our ancestors used to, shape an axe, and this is quite amazing. But what we cannot transmit is experience. When you're young, you're told, "Oh, you'll see, it comes with experience." And nothing is more frustrating than this when you're young. And then when you get older and you get experience, you start understanding what experience means. It has much to do with how you deal with the relation between the facts and the emotions, and how you deal with things. And the irony is that you need experience to understand what experience is. So that's the challenge. And my thinking is, what if we were able to at least explain what experience is? That would be a leap in our human societies. So I'm trying to do this. So I'm going to try and fail again here in the context of a FileMaker conference, right? Which means that, 30. So my challenge is how to share. So we are again in this very specific context of a technical conference where we all know the same tools, and that wouldn't be the same challenge as if I was talking about something else. So maybe I will start with saying what this presentation is not. So it's not going to be a collection of tricks and tips. Okay, that's not the subject here. It's not a recollection of all memories, although we all have a tendency to do that when we meet each other, because that's one of the best parts of this community. We have all memories. Okay, that's off topic here. So it's not a technical session with techniques that you will be able to reproduce. I'll mention some, of course. You're very welcome to come and visit us at the booth or after the session here, and we can exchange on it. But the idea is not that you take away some recipes. No, that's not. And it's not a good practice versus bad practice discussion, right? Something you will agree with, something you will disagree with. I don't care. You just pick what you need, what you want to start thinking about that. Okay. And what it's especially not, it's a discussion about naming conventions. Right? Please. Okay, that's unfortunately how most of FileMaker developer discussions turn into, and that's off topic. Okay? So, anyway, my conventions are the best, says everyone. So, what it may be is a collection of thought, of inspirations, sources, of concepts that I understood or mastered throughout those years, right? So you won't find a logical articulation between everything, right? So I really need you to focus and grab some stuff and start thinking about maybe later, but I need you to, be actively, because it's not going to be like a smooth stream. Okay. I'm trying to sharing a state of mind, right? So I'm going to give you ideas of what is in my mind when I do development, right? Some is irrelevant to you, some it might be relevant. Okay. So hold on your chairs, and let's see where that leads us. So, how I see it, FileMaker, how I see it. It sounds really egotic. It's really, I don't know how this will turn out, but let's see. One of the biggest concepts that was really a return for me is when I understood the concept of responsibility. Who is responsible for what in my application? So what is this script responsible for? This led me to split the process in short scripts. But also, I always wonder, okay, to which extent? At some point, the concept of a process exists, right? So maybe a script doesn't have to be that short because it brings more problems. So is it a process very specific, or is it a script that should do something very specific, very, very specific, and be used by many processes, right? Data modeling. For instance, in which table should this field be? This is an error I see many times, and FileMaker is kind of a... And also, this is the only instance where I think a naming convention makes a difference, is because you sometimes people are not focused on the data model. So they put fields where they are able to get the info from, without wondering, okay, does this really make sense to have this field there, or do you need to create a new table or a new file? So, data normalization, denormalization. I don't think it's, there are only two aspects. There is a whole continuum between those two. So have very relational data model or very flat tables. Okay. So you've got to always to wonder, what is my goal here? Should I emphasis on data modeling or performance, or how can I use techniques that are beneficial to the two aspects? Single files or single file or multiple file solutions. So since we had the opportunity with FileMaker 7 to have everything in one file, so everyone doing that, and I don't think this is always a good idea. Sometimes there is a real reason to have multiple files, and not only mentioning the data UI separation. It can be for other reasons like security, size of the files, backups. There are multiple reasons. So it's always something I try to think about. And security-based logic. Who can see, edit what? Can I have multi-tenant application? Does FileMaker allow it? To which extent? And so on. Where should the logic be defined? So we have many ways to query the database with FileMaker. We can use the relationships graph, we can use the calculation engine, we can use the script. Just if you just think about, or summary fields, that's just only to get some information, right? So where should the logic be defined? That's something you need to think about, not just do because it works, right? So for instance, you need to summarize, to have a total of lines. Do you need to use a sum function on a related record, or do you need to have a summary field at the child record level, right? These are questions. You achieve the same result, but it will make sense in one situation or the other. So whose responsibility is this? So in my opinion, if I take this example, having the total amount of the invoice lines is the responsibility of the invoice line table rather than the invoice table, right? So I prefer to have a summary field there than having an unstored calc at the invoice level, right? That's just an example. So responsibility. Completely different topic. Think about FileMaker as a platform. You're not a FileMaker Pro developer. You're a FileMaker developer. Right? There's a lot more than Pro. So this is a slide that inspired me. Actually, it's not this version. Clay was kind enough to send me the most recent version, but many years ago, I saw him, Clay Mako, presenting the architect, some slides about the FileMaker architecture. I think it was with FileMaker 16, and it was before and after. And I was stunned, and immediately I saw things that were becoming possible, which actually he didn't really want us to notice, but that's but knowing the architecture, the general architecture of the platform is very important. It gives you ideas. It tells you what can be done, what are the dependencies, and so on. And that's something in our community we're not so good at. We keep complaining that there's no documentation, and when there is, we don't read it. So knowing the platform is very important. Being aware of the components, how it works, and so on is very important. Platform. So be aware that FileMaker is the distributed architecture. Earlier today, Andy said it was client-server, but he's marketing. It's not client-server, right? It's distributed architecture, which means that the heavy work can be split between Pro, or WebDirect, by the way, the client, and the server. Both are working, right? So we've got to understand who is doing what, and you can take advantage of that. It's a very, very modern, by the way, architecture, right? If you think this guy 40 years ago, they thought about that. Now it's becoming popular, distributed architecture. But they were so visionaries. Database engine. I'm just giving you some thoughts. Some auto-enter calculation makes the database model very powerful. Auto-enter calculation, auto-updating, yes, with the unchecked box, re-evaluating. So for instance, environment, index, and data layers are three layers that people usually refer to as the database model. It's three completely different layers with different performance. So environment is get found count, get total record count, get record ID. This is very, very fast. Okay, FileMaker does not even need to query the data. So it's super fast. Think about it, especially with what's coming. Work with record IDs. Calculation, another ID, completely different. Calculation is not a data type, right? For some UI reasons in FileMaker 1 and 2, they had only one menu, so they made you believe that calculation is just another type of data like text or number, which is not, right? So keep in mind, this is just a method, and a field, the data type is text or number or data, whatever, just like standard fields. So basically a calculated field is just a field of some type which the user cannot modify. That's the only difference with an auto-enter calculation. Of course, you have unstored. Yes, and that's the next point. Stored calculations and unstored calculations are completely different things, right? One is data, one is a query, right? It's completely different. It falls under the same, presentation and everything. These, you can consider them as two completely different things. So a stored calculation is exactly the same as a field defined with auto-enter calcs, except the user cannot modify, right? But it's a piece of data. It's stored in the database. Calculation engine. Always think how it relies on the data model, including the relationship graph. So the calculation engine is not fast or slow. It just depends on how your data is architectured, right? Keep in mind that the security calculation engine is different. It's a different engine. So it has to, always think that it has to process all records to determine if you're entitled to see a record or not. So it's going to work only if you use it with narrow tables, stored fields, and so on and so forth. Otherwise, you're going to do very slow solutions that are basically unworkable. When I say this, people like to look at me with this, but the calculation engine, the calculation actually dialog, and the relationship graph are just two components of the query language, right? So the relationship graph has not an ERD, as you know. It's a way to write a query, right? Or at least it's the first step to building a query that you can then use with the complete with the calculation dialog, right? So it's a part of the query language, nothing else. Am I too fast? Do you want me to? Okay, I'm just splitting out some ideas like that. I hope it makes sense. The script engine, what do I have to say about the script engine? So there are several script engines. There is the client side, Pro, actually kind of different on WebDirect. There is the PSource. There's SASE, which means scheduled scripts on the server, and a web publishing engine, right? All these, they're able to perform scripts, and they have their specificities, but you need to think, okay, you need to wonder which one should I prefer to run, right? Or do I need, for instance, should I use PSource, or should I have a queue on the server treating messages? Okay, for instance, a script that is going to be called a zillion times per day. You don't want to call PSource every time, right? It's inefficient. It creates as many sessions as needed. Yes, you have a question? No, sorry. As opposed to creating a queue on the server, having a SASE script or a schedule script that runs in a loop and sees messages incoming and processing them, right? So in both cases, you're using server-side scripts, right? But in fact, it's completely two different architectures. So many gateways. FileMaker across the years has had so many, from CDML to instant web publishing to everything, right? We have several tools at our disposal, such as still now XML. Don't throw it away, it's good at some things. Data API, OData, ODBC. They all have their pros and cons. Think about what they can do for you. Okay, now a little bit more details about distributed architecture, which is different from client-server. Client-server means just the client calls the server, gets an answer, and that's it. Then everything is done on the server, right? The client basically just displays the information. Distributed architecture means both are working, right? And in the case of FileMaker, the client is doing a lot of the work. So I'm thinking those components that I listed here are as actors, right? And I'm writing a play. When I'm designing a software, I'm thinking, yeah, those are actors. They can have a role or not. For instance, AppleScript hasn't had a part in my plays for a long time, but it might come back. We never know. But all these components, and maybe I forgot some. It doesn't really matter, but they can play a role, or maybe they're not needed, right? But you have all this at your disposal. Things, the new ones, Studio, Connect, and Connect. Okay, so the question I wonder, what are the limitations of each? I'm just giving you an example. I like data API. Data API is nice, but if I'm going to have to process many scripts through data API, I want to pass parameters to them, right? To those scripts. For some reason, I'm not criticizing here. I have this in mind. I know that scripts are called through if I use data API, I know that scripts are called using a get URL, right? A get request, HTTP request. And get HTTP request is very limited in the length of the parameter I'm sending to it, right? Versus OData, where they correctly, in my opinion, used post. Okay, so for the same kind of request, regardless of the authentication issues or anything other than that, just this, I'm going to be limited with data API, and I'm not going to be limited with OData, right? So it doesn't mean data API should not be considered, but I need to be aware of that limitation when I start architecturing a solution, right? So I should wonder, who's doing the heavy work? The client, PSOS, SASE script for a queue. In my solution, it won't be, I won't make the same choices if I know I'm building a solution that is going to be used across multiple continents on Earth, or in an office with a different amount of data and so on. Okay, so I have to question this. Who is going to work? When should the data transit? It's fine. We can build a solution that are used on a very long distance, but not if you're constantly downloading, uploading data. That's not going to work, right? But if you are able to download the data for which the user needs, and then he edits it and uploads it back, that's fine. FileMaker is good at it, right? So when should the data transit? Very important question. And these are only some choices I'm going to make, but what are the consequences on integrity, availability, indexing, so on and so forth? Find ways to, this is a solution I found for once and for all. So how to pass parameters, script results, how do you communicate? What's your paradigm? For instance, if you are managing a script queue, to take the same example, how are you going to send messages to the servers to say, hey, process this when you have time? Okay, how am I going to get the result? How am I going to use that result to give feedback to the user, and so on and so forth, okay? So communication between components are mostly script parameters and script results. Also, pass found sets. That's very important thing. If you delegate to the server, okay, you have to recreate the environment. You're on a client, okay? You do some find, sort, whatever, and at some point you want the server to process what you have. But you need a way to communicate that found set to the server, for instance, so it is able to process that. This is quite a challenge. It won't be much longer, but okay, some ideas about the database engine. Are you following? Yeah, it's hard. I know it's hard. It's a lot of different stuff. So we have no data level triggers, but we have auto-enters calculations, like I said earlier. So you can basically think about auto-enter calculations as on-update triggers, right? The great advantage if you use that is that it's for data integrity. If your data is self-healing, then it doesn't matter how you modify the data, right? If it's through FileMaker Pro, through the web browsers, through a third-party app, the data is going always to be correct, right? Because you do lookups, you do calculations, and that's only the database engine. It doesn't matter how you do it. In the end, you always get the correct data. So I love it for data integrity. This I said already. Okay, environment is super fast, I said already. Okay, index, yes. Earlier I said there are 3 levels in my mind, in my own representation. There are 3 levels of the data layer. I'm not saying, it's a lot about my own representations. Some may be completely false, but they help me conceive the platform, right? So I see 3 levels: the environment, the index, and then the data layer, right? Environment, I mentioned earlier, it's get found count, get record ID. It's super fast. FileMaker does not need anything. It goes to a catalog that's super fast. Then you have index, right? Index does not need to download the whole data. You just download the index, which is usually already downloaded when you need it. So for instance, how to use the index in FileMaker. Value list, or based on the index, single field value list, right? So, what time is it? I just have time for just an example. We had a very, very busy solution with very many users making a lot of very short calls to data, right? To a point where FileMaker server could not cope, and we had some 301 errors. Because when we tested if a record was open or not, FileMaker was failing. It was telling us, yes, the record, you can open the record without an error, and then you would try to modify the record, and it was in fact already used by someone else. Okay? That's because when you get a record, FileMaker downloads the whole record, or the set of record, for that matter. And then when you finished uploading and updating and you commit, it uploads again the whole record, not only the fields that were modified. Right? So this is something you've got to keep in mind. So there were so many users, and the calls were and the modifications were so fast and so quick that FileMaker could not cope anymore. So what I did was, instead of opening the record, I managed a value list, okay, with just a single field table, and we were creating, as soon as a user would open a record, it was creating a record in that table with just the ID, okay? So it was super fast, a very narrow table, one field, and I based the value list on that, right? So the index was super fast. So instead of opening the record to see if it was available, I was just questioning, is that record in the value list of the busy record, right? Okay, it was much, much better. So that's just an example of, it was not solving 100% of the cases, by the way. It solved about 95%, which was already not bad. But just to tell you, think about those three levels. Environment, or what the get functions can give you, index, and then only the data. Okay, another ID, I use that from time to time. Then no one understands my code anymore, but sometimes I have no choice. Next serial numbers can be modified contextless. Okay, so that's something if you want to communicate some information between areas that should not normally communicate because maybe they are not even on the same file or in the same context, you can pass some information using next serial number, right? Another thing is the field comment is the only place when you can store metadata. So I built several techniques based on that by storing some metadata information about the field in the field comments. By the way, that's how the Claris built some example files with the AI to describe the database structure here. So they use the same thing. So it's the only place for now where you can have metadata. Don't hesitate to tell me if I'm too fast. Yes?
Can you give an example of how you would use that next serial number other than literally just setting the next number? You kind of hinted that you're using it to pass data, like.
So for instance, I want to avoid several pieces of script to do the same thing. So I said, okay, the first one that starts sets a flag in the next serial number, right? And then the other one just check, okay, yeah, someone is busy with that solution. Should just exit. That's just one example. Okay? It's just a flag that doesn't go through data that you can get from anywhere.
So you're not actually using that particular tables or fields next serial number to increment records. You're using it as a place to store data.
Exactly. Just exactly.
Okay.
And can you say the same thing about the metadata space? Can you access that?
Yeah, you have a field comment function, calculation function.
To get field comment?
Yes. That's very useful. So FileMaker as a platform. Earlier I said you're not a FileMaker Pro developer, you're a FileMaker developer, but that even was wrong, because now you're a Claris developer, right? So you should embrace Connect and Studio as part of your, your casting. Earlier you said they were members of my cast, right? You can use them. It's even easier now that you can trigger a connect workflow from FileMaker script. They're now they're fully part of your cast. Okay, the next 3 quests. Data integrity, performance and simplicity. A fellow developer and friend, David Wikström, once told me we should love data more. Actually, the exact sentence was, in our FileMaker community, I'm quoting, I feel people don't love data enough, right? And it was like it struck me. I was like, yeah, this was something I keep in mind. It's some data should be somehow sacred, right? It's what we work for is data. So we should love data. Should be something like very. It should be your focus. I'll come to that a bit later with more detail. Performance. Keep in mind, this is what the user sees. Of course, there's the UI and UX, that's obvious. But performance, it's absolutely, I mean, a user will be satisfied if the solution is fast. That's, I mean, Google in the early the beginning of this century made some very explicit tests. It was like, every milliseconds of that their search page would take was decreasing the number of searches. It was crazy. So keep in mind, performance is absolutely important. Simplicity. So from smartness to wisdom. I'll come back to that. So data integrity. So be obsessed with data integrity and consistency and accuracy. I often see some concern about about avoiding data deletion, as if data deletion was something extraordinarily bad. Actually, any data corruption is bad. I kind of prefer deletion because you notice it, right? But having the wrong information is even worse than than deleting records by mistake, right? So be obsessed with integrity. Avoid modifying the same data by several means. So FileMaker has a set of tools, of course, that help us having a single way of modifying a piece of data. So auto-enter options, again, these are my best friends. The more you put your logic in those, the more consistent will be your data, because the data is self-healing, right? It doesn't matter, I said earlier, how you modify your data with a script, with a user input, with the web client, whatever. The data will self-heal. Custom function. They allow you to have the logic of how to modify something in one place, and just use it all the time when you need that. For instance, I use a lot of constants in my custom functions, right? For instance, I use, let's say I have a solution where an order can have several statuses, and I will refer to those statuses many times in the solution. What if the order is open, if it's pending, if it's invoiced, and whatever, right? So I have custom functions just to have constants, and I will refer to this constants this way, right? So I don't have hard-coded many times the same string. I prefer to have centralized custom function. So make every call you make to data, if you can keep it with a single way, that's always better, maintainable. API-like scripting for CRUD operations. I'm not saying I use this a lot, but I like when it's done. It's the idea of having scripts that are called by other scripts just to do those CRUD operations, right? It's you have a script that does a specific, that is in charge. It's again the concept of responsibility that I mentioned earlier, but having a script that behaves like an entry point. Okay, this script is responsible for modifying a contact data, right? So I send it parameters, and it returns a result, and it behaves like that. That's not so easy to maintain with FileMaker because you need to have many scripts and folders and so on, but it's super clear and super easy to understand your code and so on.
And can I just quickly ask the former point about having where you have a status of an order, but you somehow abstract it through a custom function?
Yeah, so the question is, I'll rephrase I have to repeat the questions I realized for the audio, but about the constants that I mentioned earlier. So it was, instead of having, for instance, a script that will set my status to pending, and then another calculation that say if the status is pending, right, between quotes as strings, I have a custom function that just returns pending, right? And when I want to set that status, I'm calling this custom function. And when I want to read that status, I'm also using this custom function. Okay? Is that?
So they're numbers? So like the status is a number?
No, it doesn't have to be more complex. It can be just return, in that case, pending, a string. But I'm not writing the string in every call. I'm just calling the custom function. So if one day my customer wants to rename pending into open, I can do it. Okay? I need to update the data though, but okay. Okay, so use self-healing data. So first, FileMaker is too loose in the data type. That was a brilliant, genius idea 40 years ago, really. It was absolutely brilliant to be able to have alphanumerical characters in a number field, to have repeating fields. All these concepts were extraordinary. Now they are a pain. So, I use those. These are only a few examples of how a field can auto-heal heal itself. So for instance, dates. Dates sometimes, depending on the input, you have a 0 before the month, or or the day, or you don't have it, or sometimes you have the seconds after in a timestamp, or you don't. Whatever. If you do that kind of get as date self, then you got a proper date that is consistent throughout. Okay, things like that. For removing the format of a text input, avoids copy pasting from web pages and all that stuff. Sometimes you need rich text, but it's quite the exception, really. Okay.
Can I answer that? One place where the get as date is really important is for variables, because sometimes they're not set as a date and then you're evaluating.
Yeah, it actually, how you set your variables depends, if you pass it a string, but if you pass it a date field, it would be a date.
Yes, it would, except when it's in a dialog first and you're setting the.
Oh yeah, but because a dialog returns a string, unless you edit directly a date field. Mm-hmm. Okay, just about data integrity, a session that really inspired me more than anything was Todd Geist's presentation. I don't remember when, but long time ago.
2007.
Sorry?
2007.
2007?
I think I was there.
Okay, yeah. So, see, it was a long time ago.
And I remember it.
Yeah, because everyone who saw this session actually remembers it because it was mind-blowing. So, it was about transactions. Okay, so first, I honestly had no idea of what a database transaction was before I saw this session, because I'm completely uneducated in terms of information. But so I discovered that, and it was mind-blowing for me how that would work, right? Actually, I realized I had been using transactions using another fellow developer, Hugo De Lucas, has a magic key technique. I don't know if you know it or not, it doesn't matter, but in fact it was doing transactions just the same way. But it made me understand what I was loving so much in that previous technique I was using, right? So sometimes we use a technique, but we don't really understand the fundamentals behind it, right? So that was a, really eye-opening session for me. He presented it many times then, so I'm sure there are some video recordings you can find. And now, following up on Todd's transactions session, and now that everyone knows that he's a living deity and no one will... I will criticize this session, okay? I will just tell you, okay, this session was eyes-opening, but what he was presenting was mostly he was presenting a technique, okay, which was about looping through portal rows, okay, to do transaction. It was magic. It was something you could copy paste, to your solution. It was just it was a technique. But the fundamental concept behind it, that it didn't really explain. The fundamental was that you can have now, of course, we have the new script transactions, but you could work in a transactional way by editing or creating records through relationships, right? Or even deleting, but it's true for deletion, you need a portal. But anyway, that was the fundamental thing. Okay, so the whole thing it was presenting was a technique based on that fundamental. See the difference? And that's something I think we all share is we tend to, because we're problem solvers, we tend to focus on the recipe, not the chemistry that explains it, right? If you do fundamental research, you're not going to stop at seeing the phenomena. You need to really go in depth, understand it. So that last part, Todd didn't present. That you can just, any relationship would work. You don't have to have the portal or loop or anything, right? And that's what I learned, and it's always go down to the bottom of things and really understand the underlying concepts. That's really, I think, something important in my view. Okay, next chapter, performance. Think about performance from the beginning, from the data model. Think about your what I said earlier, all the actors or your cast, what they can do for you to help you with performance. Write fast code from the beginning, even if you can always optimize a bit later, you won't do it, so do it up front. Think performance from the beginning. And don't do stupid things just because it works, because you know data is going to come in. So your SQL statements at the layout level is working fine in 2 minutes, but it won't work once you have got data. So don't do stupid things. It will take you a lot of time to fix it from the beginning. Spend your time monitoring, right? We have techniques for that. Monitor. And optimize only when it's really needed at the end, when you miss something or when something is not. Okay? Another slide that really inspired me, I should print that in our office, really. It was John Thatcher about the overhead. The overhead is very simple. It's ping multiplied by the number of remote calls gives you the overhead. So basically the time a request takes, right? That's why I'm so much advocating to be able to easily monitor the number of remote calls that you do in your solutions. There are ways to monitor it, but it's not easy enough, I think. So if you monitor the remote calls, you basically know the performance that your solution will have. And of course, the ping time, which is very important, develop in the same type of environment you're going to have your production server on. And that's not an advertisement. But you're welcome to visit our booth on the 5th floor. No, just kidding. Okay, the very important slide. Okay, then now simplicity. It took me years to become a good developer, right? But it took me at least the same number of years to reach a point where the code is simple. For no reason, when I turn back, I say, why was I doing things differently before? Just because it was not clear enough in my own head, right? That's experience. So, yeah, I'm not pretending to be Picasso in any way. It's just... so now I write code everyone understands. If I die, no one will notice. And even I can understand my code, except of course if I'm dead. And it works, because when I write simple code, I can reuse it a lot. And when I reuse it a lot, I test it a lot, because it's used a lot. So bug reports will come in, if there are, right? So simple means easy to reuse. Easy to reuse means tested by design. Okay, this is experience. Learn to make compromise. Yeah, this is definitely not me 30 years ago. But generic code, I like writing generic code that I can reuse all the time. Same scripts and so on. Yeah, but to a certain extent. Because too generic means the script can become complex, right? At some point, I'm just opening the debugger and I'm saying, oh no, not this one. Because I know this is a script, it does really everything I need it to do, but I just hate debugging it. So at some point, at some extent, no, sometimes generic is too generic, right? So make compromise. Just an example, so you'll see some code during this presentation. This is a typical loop, right? I'm looping through the values of a list. Okay, that's easy. Okay, iterator I, and then get the value, and then show the value in dialog. Then clean up the mess at the end. Okay, very simple. Actually, these are local variables. I don't have really to clean the mess, but if the script would continue, I would need to. Okay, so just using custom functions and nice code, I end up doing this. This is my code. It's just doing exactly the same thing as the other thing, just because I spent the time to write a custom function for.list that just does the whole work, right? So I can see immediately what my script does. I don't have all the mechanics, all the, the dirty work being exposed. I can focus on what I really want to do. Okay? So this is what I call beautiful code. I mean, I don't know if you like it, it's a matter of taste, but also simple does not always mean short. That's another lesson. Before I had some time where I was like focusing on having the minimum number of lines. No, that was intellectually interesting, but doesn't mean simple. Simple, in this instance, it's shorter, but it's not always the case. Okay. Completely different topic. Build an easy to work with theme. So we spent a lot of time designing a theme that we use and reuse, unless the customer wants something different, but which is very easy to work with. So some examples, this theme, the labels and the field object have the same height. So they are very easy to move or displace, things like that. The dimensions match the grid. And the grid, for the first time in my life, I turn on the snap to grid. It makes it so easy. But you've got to have objects that are really designed to match that grid. So yeah, my date is going to fit in the date field within a calendar icon. We had to think about many things to have this theme really well done, but now it's incredibly easy to work with. Going back to database engine scripting continuum, I imagined, based on what I know how they code. We don't share much code in this community. We share tricks and so on, but it's very rare that we see each other's solution. But okay, this is a continuum where I would stand here, like most of my logic is in the DB engine, right? Auto-enter calculations, etc. For the reason I said earlier, it's easier to have data integrity. And then I have some fellow developers and friends here on this axis. And I think Wim would be here, and having a minimum logic in the database engine part and the maximum as much as you can on the scripting part, which is fine. It's different. So this here, it's more data integrity is easier. I'm not saying you should not focus on the other two, elements of the nights, of the other quests of the night, right? All three you must have them: performance, data integrity, and simplicity, right? You must have them. But here, data integrity is easier, and here, simplicity is easier, right? Okay, you have just to open the script. You don't have to go and look at the database calculations if they do something that you don't see from the script engine, okay, from the script editor. Okay, but with recent evolutions of the FileMaker, I really have to stop. I'm sorry, I'm late. With transaction and OData, I tend to move that way, really. It has become easier to have data consistency even using more scripts because you have of these things. I'm just going to finish up in very quickly. I'm sorry, I have very little time for questions. So if I have some advice to give, is download examples from developers, including all techniques. Spend time on them to really understand to the bottom of how they work, not just being able to reproduce. Really understand the concept, how it works, what is the idea they are based on. RTFM from time to time. It took me years and years to notice some details of a function, calculation function documentation. Okay, and so for instance, who here is still using Get System Platform to know if you're on a Mac on a PC? Yeah, you shouldn't. Why do we? Because just we are too old, right? We have a Get Device now, and that's doing explicitly. Test everything. So before implementing, developing in your solution, just create new files. Create new files all the time, all the time. There's no shortcuts in the menu, just create one. Every time you have an idea, you want to test something, just create a new file. Name it Toto, and do your thing, and then when it works, you do it in the database. But at least you really understand what you need. And question features. So again, everything I invented is about going down to the bottom of what a new feature would bring. What is it really? Does what the marketing tell me it is, right? And what is it really? What does it rely on? What does it change for the platform? Okay? There's more to read, but okay. And finally, thank you.